Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Rader. This video is for teachers of economics who are working on the Unit 1 summative assessment on credit and debt, the game. And the key question that you'll examine with your students is how can I identify, assess, and represent the factors that influence a person's credit? And we thought an interesting way to have your students contextualize all of the concepts they've learned over the course of the unit is to design and create a game that's related to personal finance. And the first comment that I noted here is that the actual game cards that you could use, it's related to what's in the Civics for All digital curriculum, which I'll also show you in this short video, pages 104 to 118, specifically looking at the New York State tax proposal cards. So in this particular assessment, we are asking students to create a game that can be used to teach others about credit and debt. It's designed to accompany the credit and debit case study, where we looked at wise decisions that could be made and unwise decisions that could be made in establishing a credit history. And I am making a companion video for students in the series, and some of the things that I highlighted are included in the student video to help them really consider the ways in which they can present this game. And it's really up to you as the instructor to allocate the amount of time that you think is requisite for your students to really process this material and a way for them to be able to engage in a creative outlet, whether it be this semester now while we're doing a combination of in-person and remote learning, or if this is next year, really looking at fully in-person learning scenarios. But a couple ways that students could do this: they could create a manual for a tabletop role-playing game. They can create their own case study for Casey. It could be a board game. It could be a simulation using presentation software. It really is up to you ultimately as the instructor in terms of how you want your students to present this information. But what we are asking students to do is to engage in some basic research using the hyperlinks here for our credit card and debt case study annotated bibliography. And they're really answering three key questions. They want to be able to define what is credit, how do you establish credit, and what are the challenges and biases of the credit and debt system. And I would refer your students specifically to the lesson where we looked at challenges to banking equity. So in terms of what students can do, they would want to identify a game type and then engage in some basic research. So there's many ways that you could do this. So for example, as a class, you could look at a digital version of the Monopoly game system or the Settlers of Catan board. You could look at an instruction manual. You really have a lot of flexibility in terms of how you may want to suggest your students to implement their project. So for example, in this comment, I wrote, for example, you could create a variation of the chance cards in Monopoly where you create certain scenarios for the players. So for example, instead of, quote, take a walk on the boardwalk, where you move right to the boardwalk property in Monopoly, you could create a chance card advance to an 800 credit score, where you can then set up the character to make wise or unwise credit decisions that would affect their ability to advance in the game. And likewise, the comment I included here, just want to highlighted so that we can all see it. It is helpful to allow students some flexibility if you have the time and space to do so, to create a board game of their choice. Models can be a useful tool, or you could also just encourage your students to engage in some very basic online research. They could use some of the Boolean logical operators, such as personal finance card games. And there are several examples that one can find in a Google search review, which can include bingo cards or even excerpts from the game of life. After they design their game, they'll want to create a representation of the game. You may want to provide some space to present the game to the class, and then give students an opportunity to reflect on what it is that they learned. So in the Civics for All digital curriculum, this is page 104 in the packet, lesson 4. And in the state tax proposal simulation, the reason why I'm showing you this briefly is after going through the lesson itself and the materials, in the tax simulation, there are a series of playing cards that students could use or whether you could adapt to make it more aligned to personal finance if you were to choose to go in that direction with your students. So we can see different choices. We see blue, we see an orange color. There's also a green color. There's different ways that you could approach this, again, with your students. And just as a general note to teachers, and this is included in the digital curriculum for Passport to Social Studies on the second slide here, if you really want to go into a deep dive on this unit assessment, it will take several days. I did try this out with my own students. It took 4 different lessons, so 4 different 45-minute blocks to do it. So it is really up to you in terms of how you'd like your students to create their games, and really kind of just thinking about how to gauge their input. So with that in mind, in terms of the unit assessment itself, really the goal is to help students to be creative, and to develop a game to demonstrate their knowledge of credit and debt. And in terms of some general ways to introduce it, these slides are useful in terms of just helping you to help your students reflect on what they learned in the last case study on credit cards and debt, and really to ask them and to see what they feel they need to know in order to better understand how credit and debt work. Then you would introduce the assessment itself with students and clarify any misconceptions that they have. Ask them questions that they have about the process itself. You may also want to spend some time to explain the rubric to them, or have them read it and explain it to you in terms of what are they really being assessed on in terms of their final product, and what questions do they have in terms of the criteria that's actually in this rubric, that really are consistent with their needs and with your schedule for your students. So in the introduction model for really like a day one of the unit assessment, again, if you were breaking it down into 3 or 4 lessons, really trying to help students to consider the extent to which games can help them to learn new things, thinking about ways to be further engaged in this learning process, and then also get them to think about, like, conversely, what elements might make a game not so much fun and disengaging for players. Um, and that's something to consider as well. And then you could have students respond in the slides provided if you so choose to do so. And then the independent work is the creation of the game. And this is where there's, again, a lot of flexibility. Students can do this independently. Students can do this in partnerships. They could do it in small groups. It's really a way for them to present to their classmates what they've learned over the course of Unit 1, really looking at this personal finance unit in economics, and thinking about how credit and debt ultimately is an economics problem, and thinking about it as such. And then this could be, again, in a day 3 lesson or in a day 4 lesson, if you want to provide some additional time for students to present their games. It'll really depend on your school schedule. If you're running a period every single day, or if it's a block schedule where your class meets every other day, you'll have to kind of rethink and reimagine what would work best in your particular environment. And as we roll into the spring of 2022, we'll also have to think about what classroom configurations look like at that point. And then really just to end this video, just it'd be useful as always to ask students to consider what they learned as just as a reflective process in learning. What did they learn about the idea of credit? What did they learn about debt from creating this game, and then from checking out and playing other classmates' games as well? All right, so that'll do it for this video. Check out part 2 in the series, where we look at a shorter video designed for students, helping them think through this unit summative assessment and how they might create some of their games. All right, have a great day, everybody. Take care.